What's up, guys, and welcome back to our final week in our series on growing in gratitude. Now, guys, I hope you've all had a great Thanksgiving last week. I enjoyed all the time with my family, all the great food, possibly even enjoyed it all a little bit more this year when I've been thinking about and talking about with you guys all the things that I'm thankful for over the last couple weeks. Tonight, we're going to talk about one more area where we could all do a better job of showing gratitude, and that's to our friends. We like to think that we're all independent, right? We don't need anyone else's help. We can do this ourselves, but that is simply not true. We are designed to function best when in community with other people. Even in a purely worldly context, we still work better when we are in community with other people. When we look to Scripture, we see so many examples of community and how people lean on each other. Now, Jesus, right, he brought in 12 men to share his life with during his earthly ministry. Even there, he had 3 that were given even closer access at different times in the earthly ministry. Paul, as he traveled the world telling people about Jesus, had companions that would travel with him as missionaries, sharing the good news all over the place. And then those guys would rely on friends around the regions to help with church planting and support of the ministry as well. In his letter to the church at Philippi, Paul writes this: "I thank my God in all my remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine for you, all making my prayer with joy of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now." This is a beautiful way of saying how important the community was to Paul. He was always thinking about those friends and their support for him personally and for the ministry that they were doing together. And as I studied for this last night's talk, there are just so many verses in Scripture that talk about friends. So we're going to look at just a couple of my favorites before we get into kind of the meat of the talk tonight. Perhaps one of the most powerful explanations of what biblical friendship looks like comes in the book of John 15:13, where we read this: "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends." Jesus was talking to that group of guys that he shared life with, right? The 12 disciples. He was telling them in this section they had a connection back to God the Father because they had a relationship or a connection with him. Jesus was that connection, and he would go on to demonstrate the importance of that relationship by laying down his life on the cross for those friends and then for us as well. Now, Proverbs is a wisdom book, and we find lots of thoughts on friendship in the book of Proverbs. And one that really connects to what we're about to talk about tonight is found in Proverbs 17:17, where it says, "A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity." Now, Ecclesiastes 4:9 through 10 tells us 2 are better than 1 because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Guys, friends are just important, and they're an important part of our lives, and everyone needs quality friendships. But we have to be sure that we're talking about those quality friendships. You guys may know a ton of people at school or on your team or in your dance troupe, but they're not all your friends. You know, I think there was a season in school, I remember it well, where we're all encouraged and told that we have to be friends with everyone, right? Everyone's our friends. And we feel like we're obligated to open up our trust and vulnerability to someone just because we see them on a regular basis. Now, as we got older and experienced betrayal and hurt from these so-called friends, we realized the idea of friends with everyone isn't realistic. We got to be kind to everyone, true. But there are healthy walls that we can put into place to protect our emotions and our other relationships. And tonight, we're going to talk about an example of a healthy friendship from Scripture, and then also an unhealthy friendship in Scripture as well, so that we can use those kind of as tools to possibly even evaluate some of our relationships that are kind of walking that line between healthy and unhealthy. We're going to close the night out too with a challenge to show some gratitude to just a single person that's one of those healthy friends that we have in our lives that we rely on so much. So let's go ahead and start with the bad news first, right? Proverbs 13:20 tells us, "Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm." I don't ever want to be called a companion of a fool. In the book of Job, a righteous man is put to the test by the enemy, right? By the devil. His family is taken away, his possessions are lost, even his health is attacked as part of this test. Now in Job 2:9, his wife gives him some absolutely rotten advice when she says, "Do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die." Guys, I know we're talking about friends tonight, but you just can't overlook how horrible this wife's advice was. Thinking that the suffering in his life was caused by Job's actions, his wife says this hateful thing, right? We should never say anything remotely close to this to anyone else, ever. Everyone has value, everyone has worth, and even when they aren't being a good friend, and to have someone say something like that to someone who is hurting though, man, it could have some horrible consequences for both people. So be careful with your words. Remember to be kind. But Job has 3 friends that come along just after this hateful moment with his wife. And through the rest of the book, these friends try to help their friend figure out what he had done to bring all this tragedy into his life. And later, they're actually reprimanded by God for speaking for him with untrue statements, like they're speaking on God's behalf and they were wrong. God wasn't punishing Job for things he had done. There was a purpose in his suffering, and God would eventually restore Job to even more than he had before this whole test happened. And during the bulk of the book of Job, these friends are bad. They point fingers, they lay blame. And I get it, they're trying to fix Job's situation, but they're going about it in all the wrong ways. So let's flip the coin now and look at a good relationship from Scripture. For that, we're going to turn to the book of Job, chapter 2, 12 and 13. Now, before we read this part, I know what you're thinking, right? Eric, we were just in Job, and the friends that we're talking about, they were being horrible to Job, his wife especially. What good examples are we going to find in the same book dealing with the same people? Well, before his friends started trying to fix his situation, they were actually amazing friends to begin with. So let's read this together and unpack it just a little bit further. And when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him. They raised their voices and wept, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads toward heaven. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. Immediately after all this calamity had happened to Job, his friends came to check on him, and seeing him from a distance, they realized that their friend was completely broken. Right? Life had got the best of him. And what was their first response? They grieved with Job. They had empathy for their friend, and instead of immediately kind of trying to fix it, they just joined in his grief. They didn't experience the loss that he had, but they grieved just the same. They also were just there for him in silence. They realized that their friend needed their presence more than any kind of comforting words or any kind of gestures of support. He just needed them there in the mess that he was facing. And that's the mark of a great friend. As we've been talking about our friends and these good examples and the bad examples from Job's life, I'm sure there's people that have popped into your head. Don't name names, but just think about those people. Friends you thought would be there forever, who turned their back on you when you hit high school and things got tough. Or maybe that person you just barely knew back in elementary school, like maybe 1 or 2 classes together, and now they're like your go-to source for everything. Friendships develop and they change over time, guys, and we need to be aware of those friendships that are healthy and pour into those friendships. Continue to grow those things into just amazing, amazing relationships. While at the same time, recognizing when a friendship has grown unhealthy and put some boundaries in place around that relationship to protect ourselves and all other relationships in our lives as well. Not that we cut them off. We don't ignore them in public or anything crazy like that. But we can put up some protective distance in that friendship for both of our best interest. So in our small groups tonight, I want us to make 2 lists. The first list is the attributes of unhealthy friendships. What are the things that cause a relationship to be hurtful or to even be toxic in our lives? Then we're going to make a list of attributes that we connect to our healthiest, most fabulous, most awesome friendships. What makes those relationships things that we rely on and connect with so naturally? Now we're going to have a closing challenge too that I'll discuss a little bit more during our worship time tonight. So guys, enjoy your time in small groups. Be thinking about the good friendships and the bad friendships, but most importantly, be thankful for those good friends that God has placed in your life. We'll talk to you soon.